This now with our experts. Tom Friedman is a foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times and author of From Beirut to Jerusalem. And we also welcome back our ABC News contributor, Bill Kristol, who is also editor of the Weekly Standard. Welcome, gentlemen. And Tom Friedman, I want to start with you. You have Ukraine's president who has virtually vanished. He's now trying to rally his supporters. However, new elections, protesters feeling they have a victory. What happens next in this country with no money and no unity? Well,
I think the good news, Martha, is the fact that this happened from the bottom up. The West didn't do this. The United States didn't do this. The EU didn't do this. Ukrainian people did this. That's, I think, very, very important to remember. But what do we learn from experiences like Egypt, for instance, where we also saw a bottom-up ousting of a long-time dictator? What we learned,
seems similar to
Egypt. Right. It does at many levels, a failing state. But also what we learned from Egypt is it's not about the morning after. It's all about the morning after the morning after. The morning after, everyone celebrates getting rid of the leader everyone hated. But what you discovered in Egypt was actually there was a huge diversity of opinion of where to go next, what they wanted to be free to do. And I think we're going to face the same challenge here in Ukraine. The second big challenge is this, like Egypt, is an economically desperate state. And, when you win Ukraine, you win a bill.
Bill Kristol, bottom up. Is that a good path? What happens now in your eye?
Look, 10 years ago, there was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. I mean, it was the first color revolution. It inspired other efforts around the world, in Lebanon, and ultimately perhaps even in Tehran and Damascus. So all honor to the people of Ukraine for having that first revolution unfortunately slipped away. I think that's partly our fault, incidentally, and the West Europeans' fault. We didn't do as much as we could have to help the newly democratic Ukraine. It was very corrupt. The oligarchs facilitated the corruption. Putin did not help at all. And so we ended up where we were, and now the people of Ukraine have done it again. And now I do think it's bottom up, which is great. I totally agree with Tom on this. George Washington, whose birthday it was yesterday, said, liberty, when it begins to take root, is a plant of rapid growth. And I think liberty is a plant of stronger growth than people sometimes like us in the West think. You know, once that spark is there, people remember it and they want it back, but we now need to help them.
We can't avoid Russia's role here, as you mentioned. What Russia does next is so key. Here is what President Obama said about that this week.
Our approach as the United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future.
Of course, Yanukovych was democratically elected, but is this a new version of a kind of a Cold War here?
Well, I don't think this is the Cold War, Martha. The Cold War is a very specific thing. Two nuclear armed powers and competing ideologies truly playing chessboard. I would argue the world is really divided up into three kinds of states right now. My co-author Michael Mandelbaum and I've been talking about this. One is countries that are focused on having a powerful state. That's Russia. And if you got oil, that's Iran, that's North Korea. If you got nukes, you can just focus on having a powerful state and playing your geopolitical games in your neighborhood. Second are states focused on having a prosperous people. That's the European Union. That's the world that many Ukrainians want to join, clearly. And third are states who are fighting over something very primal. Who are we? What are we? That's Syria. Who owns which olive tree? And in many ways, Ukraine is all three. You have, part of it, Russia competing for wanting to pull it into its powerful state sphere, funded by oil. You have Ukrainians wanting to be part of the world of globalization, the IT revolution, economic growth and opportunity. And you have a state that still isn't sure about its identity in a post-Soviet, post-Cold War world.
But Russia is in danger of losing a key ally here. Is there any danger that Russia does intervene, that they might even send in troops, as they did in Georgia?
Well, they certainly have intervened in all kinds of ways in Ukraine in the last few months and years, but they could do even more so. Look, it's nice for President Obama to say it's not a Cold War chessboard. I don't know why he says that with some disdain. That was not an ignoble thing for us to play on that chessboard for 45 years. We ended up winning that Cold War. And I do think Putin thinks he's playing chess. He thinks he's playing even a rougher game than chess, and we have to be able to match it. We could say, all honor to the people of Ukraine for beginning this process, but if we are not we and the Europeans cannot make ourselves as strong a force for democracy and the rule of law in Ukraine as Putin is for the opposite, then things may not go well.
I want to move to Syria. You mentioned Syria. The UN Security Council voted to boost aid to Syria. this weekend, but that conflict grinds on. There's been talk about perhaps new options in Syria. Is there anything more that can be done here, Tom Friedman?
Well, clearly if we identify people who truly share our values of wanting to see a pluralistic, consensually political Syria, I think we should arm and support them, and it seems to me the administration is doing that. But I'd ask you, Martha, can you name the head of the Syrian opposition?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Right.
Can anyone?
Yeah, I mean,
I can name several.
And what their agenda is. And this is, I actually can't, and that's really one of the problems, that I think a lot of people in Syria, sometimes the news is in the noise and sometimes the news is in the silence. And the fact that so many people are still clinging to Assad has to do with the fact that they do not see an opposition right now that has the will, ability, and maybe even the ideology to build a pluralistic Syria on the ground that, say, the Christians who are still clinging to Assad and the Alawites, would feel confidence in. So, I want to come back to Ukraine just for a second and to another similar revolution, Tunisia. Why is it that the Arab state that's done the best is the one we had the least to do with? Because the people took it and they owned it. And if we see that in Syria, man, I'm all for supporting it. But it's got to start with them. The Middle East only puts a smile on your face when it starts with them.
Iran did not intervene in Tunisia, and you need to support your friends when your enemies are being supported by outside powers, which I think is the case in both Ukraine and Syria. Syria was also a bottom-up revolution, a peaceful revolution, a pro-Western revolution to an amazing degree back in 2011, and we did nothing.
So Bill Kristol, step back for a moment here quickly and look at what Barack Obama's foreign policy legacy is up to this point with Syria, with Ukraine, with Libya, with Iraq, with Afghanistan.
With Iran, people around the world, I think, want liberty to an amazing degree. We've done very little to help them.
Okay, thanks to both of you. We're just getting started. Up next,